What's up, Coach Dennis here, and if you have questions about metabolism, stick around. I'm going to try and make the most short, sweet, to the point masterclass on fixing your metabolism that I've ever done. And shout out to my client, Dustin. This talk was inspired by his question about metabolism and whether or not he could be possibly sabotaging by eating too much. So when I look at metabolism, working with V-Shred, we talk about fixing your metabolism. There are many things, but I look at sort of three pillars that really want to focus in on when we're talking about metabolism. So number one is going to be basal metabolic rate. That's your baseline metabolism. If you have a slow metabolism, so to speak, it could be that your basal metabolic rate is slow. There's reasons for why that might happen from prior dietary habits. We'll get into that. Then we look at hunger hormones. Now there's leptin, ghrelin, et cetera, but really I'm looking at insulin. I think insulin's a good place to start. That's the hormone that's going to be responsible for how you utilize nutrients. And then we're going to look at sex hormones like testosterone. This is specifically for men, sorry, I can't talk. But, for women as well, and just the underlying protocol for how men would go about improving that hormonal profile would still apply to women, so we'll stick there. So we're going to look at basal metabolic rate, we're going to look at insulin, and we're going to look at testosterone. So first thing, looking at the basal metabolic rate. The good news is, to answer your question, eating too many calories is not going to sabotage your basal metabolic rate. If anything, it could improve it. However, it's not going to have you losing weight on the scale if you're overeating, because we know if you want to lose weight, you need to be in a calorie deficit. The problem that most people make, and they do temporarily sabotage their metabolism, is eating way too little calories. This is what we call a crash diet. This has been studied in very controlled studies in the biosphere, where they put people on a semi-starving diet for months on end, almost a year, and they see that their basal metabolic rate does in fact slow down by as much as 50%. So if you're an average adult male's 200 pounds, let's just say 200 pounds, their basal metabolic rate is about 2,000 calories, meaning if they just kind of weren't working out, going about their normal day, 2,000 calories would be maintenance. They wouldn't gain weight on that calorie regimen. They wouldn't lose weight. They would just sort of maintain, because those calories are matching their typical metabolic needs, their basal metabolic rate. However, if you were to suddenly eat only 1,000 calories a day and you did that for a long period of time, granted, yes, you would lose weight, but in response, your body would compensate and slow down the basal metabolic rate. So if and when inevitably you go back to a normal calorie intake, you would be then in a calorie surplus, because let's say you go back to 2,000 calories after eating 1,000 for a long period of time. Well, if your basal metabolic rate has now slowed down to 1,500 instead of 2,000, now suddenly you're in a 500 calorie surplus by eating 2,000 calories, and you've regained the weight fast. This is like basically what happens with yo-yo dieting. This is why people lose a bunch of weight and then gain it back. On top of that, losing weight too fast, you not only lose body fat, but if you're not really doing a great job with resistance training, you're losing muscle in the process, you're losing bone density, and we're seeing all these other hormones like testosterone and growth hormone, just all the hormones really, down-regulating neurotransmitters. You feel like crap is the bottom line. You feel energy is low, cognition is low, you feel like crap. So this is why we like to take the slow approach to weight loss. There is a threshold, right? If we put you in a 200, 300, 500 calorie deficit, this is not going to sabotage your metabolism. Your body can handle that. Your body can tap into fat stores to compensate for the missing calories without the alarm bells going off, without the need to downregulate your basal metabolic rate. So this is why we aim for 1 to 2 pounds of weight loss per week. And on top of that, if we do good resistance training, we can not only see the basal metabolic rate maintain, but we can see it improve. How does that improve? Primarily through muscle growth. The basal metabolic rate is basically how expensive it is to maintain homeostasis. Muscle is a much more metabolically demanding tissue than fat. So if we take 200-pound male, for example, but one has 50 pounds of muscle on his body. I'm just pulling numbers out of my ass, by the way. And one has 10 pounds of muscle on their body, right? So one's significantly fatter by ratio. The person with the more muscle is going to have a significantly higher basal metabolic rate, maybe by 200-300, maybe even 400 calories per day. So adding muscle increases your basal metabolic rate. So if you've been eating a little too much, you're struggling to stick to the diet, but you are hitting the gym and you're seeing improvements in your strength and noticing that you are getting stronger, getting more fit, likely you're building some muscle and likely you've been improving your basal metabolic rate. Another thing that can improve your basal metabolic rate is just the selection of macronutrients. Protein is going to be number one. Protein is what's going to help you build that muscle in the first place. Protein very rarely gets used in excess as fat stores. So if you overeat protein, it's not really likely that your body's going to translate all that into fat. It's just going to get kind of excreted and used for whatever it's needed to be used for. It's also the most thermogenic, meaning your body has to work harder to digest and utilize that macronutrient. So your metabolism is working more, it's increasing by intaking more protein. This is why we always want to shoot for a high protein diet. Carbs can also stimulate the metabolism, but they can spill over into fat if we do that in excess. So really you want to think about carbs as fueling the gas tank. You do not go to fill your car gas every single day. It would just, spill over because the tank is full. But you might need to fill up once or twice a week. This is why we do carb cycling. Twice a week, we have a high carb day. We replenish the muscles with glycogen so that way, A, they look more full, and B, you have better sets and workouts in the gym. You'll feel better. They have that high carb day has also a short-term spike on the metabolism, increasing the metabolism on that day. So high protein diet, carb cycling. Now, when we get into the insulin aspect of it, if you have poor insulin function from a long history of overeating calories, over consuming carbohydrates, you may have some insulin resistance. Maybe you're not full-blown diabetic, but there's actually levels to insulin resistance. So this is why the other days of carb cycling really ought to be pretty low carb days. In our carb cycling format, we do low carb, mid carb, high carb. But even our mid carb days are arguably pretty low carb, often like 120, 130 grams of carbs per day. Your brain alone can use 120 grams of carbs, so it's still pretty low. So those low carb days are going to help your body resensitize insulin. And again, resistance training and high intensity training does wonders for insulin sensitivity and carb utilization, nutrient utilization. So this is why we do all this stuff together. It's a holistic approach. The pairing is all there for a reason, okay? So we can improve insulin sensitivity through 5 out of the 7 days a week being generally pretty low carb. We can improve metabolism through high protein by building more muscle and having a more thermogenic effect. We can improve your overall experience with the diet through carb cycling by having just 2 days where you get to eat, rice and pizza and potatoes, whatever it is that you love, and making sure that your muscles are nice and full of glycogen and you're having better workouts. Okay, and then the last piece is, of course, testosterone or sex hormones. And this, again, is improved through resistance training. If you do a really good 1 hour resistance training session, we can see acutely in the blood that testosterone increases, growth hormone increases, and you're in a much more anabolic state for building muscle, which again is necessary going back to that basal metabolic rate. Now, the other factors that play in with hormones, everything from hunger hormones, insulin, testosterone, etc., is recovery. So a good night's sleep is going to play a huge role in this. Eliminating alcohol is going to play a huge role in this. Trying to eliminate stress to whatever degree you can is going to play a huge role in this. Getting lots of sunshine and fresh air whenever possible. If it's wintertime, supplementing with vitamin D is going to be critical. So these are all the factors that go into improving the metabolism. If you are doing mostly all of those things, your metabolism is in a good spot. If you're plateaued and not losing weight, it just means we need to reduce calories a little bit more. Start with just 200 calories less per day on average and see if that's enough to tip the scales. Also keep in mind that you could lose 2 pounds of fat and gain a pound of muscle, and it only shows up as 1 pound on the scale. So things look like they're going slow, but the body's still making really important and significant changes. So it's important to take pictures, it's important to take measurements. If you have access to an in-body scan, get on that in-body scan. Stay patient, stay consistent. A real successful journey is slow, and that means you're doing it right. You're not sabotaging. The only way you can sabotage is to get impatient and go and do a crash diet. So I hope that helps. This is how I think about it. If you have more questions, drop it in the comments, obviously, or reach out to me directly, and let's go from there. All right, peace.